They're here for you too. That's what he said to me. He was 78 years old, a retired maritime engineer from Oregon City who had spent 40 years overseeing cargo logistics up and down the Pacific coast, Astoria to Long Beach. The kind of man who has spent decades solving practical problems with whatever was on hand. No nonsense, no illusions. He told me, the day we met, that he didn't believe in God, had never believed in God, and that death was the same as a machine powering down. His exact words, "When the power goes off, the machine stops. I've watched enough machinery die to know what that looks like." I liked him immediately. He reminded me of the patients who are often easiest to sit with, the ones who have made their peace on their own terms without needing reassurance from a system they don't trust. He came to us with stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer. The oncology team had been clear. We were past the treatment phase. We were in the comfort phase. His daughter lived in Bend and visited 3 times in the 11 days he was with us. The rest of the time, it was Thomas and the unit and whatever he could still see out the window. For the first 8 days, he was exactly who he presented as. Sharp, occasionally sarcastic about the coffee. He read, he slept, he accepted the pain management without argument. He wasn't afraid, or at least he was very good at not showing it. On the 9th day, I noticed he was spending time looking at the corner of the room. I want to be precise about what I mean by that, because there are different kinds of looking at things. There's the unfocused gaze of advanced encephalopathy, when the eyes drift because the brain isn't organizing visual input coherently anymore. There's the restless scanning of terminal agitation, the patient whose eyes move everywhere because nowhere feels safe. And then there's what Thomas was doing. He was looking at a specific point, the upper left corner, near where the wall met the ceiling. Looking at it the way you look at something that is actually there. His vitals were stable. His orientation, short-term recall, word finding, all still intact. If I ran standard delirium screening, he passed it. The clinical picture didn't support a delirium diagnosis in the classic sense, but I wrote what I had been trained to write. Visual phenomena consistent with end-stage neurological changes. Monitoring. On the 10th day, I asked him directly, "Thomas, what are you looking at over there?" He considered the question seriously. He treated all questions seriously, another thing I appreciated about him. "People," he said. "People you recognize?" "Some." He paused. "My wife. She's been here since Tuesday." His wife had died 11 years earlier from a stroke. "A couple of others I know, and some I don't recognize." "Does it bother you?" I asked. "No," he said. "It's quiet in here with them." I sat with that for a moment. Then I moved on. I had charted it. I had assessed it. I had other patients. On the 11th day, the day before he died, something different happened. I was preparing his morning medications. He wasn't looking at the corner. He was looking at me, with the clear, focused attention he'd had on day 1 when we were first taking each other's measure. And he said quietly, without dramatic weight, "They're here for you too, you know." I stopped what I was doing. I looked at him. "I'm fine, Thomas," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." He nodded, with the patient expression of someone who has been told this before and knows better than to argue. "I know you believe that," he said. That was the end of the conversation. He was tired. He drifted off. He died the following morning at 3:47 a.m. with his daughter in the room. 3 weeks later, during what was supposed to be a routine laparoscopic cholecystectomy, gallbladder removal, outpatient procedure, home the same day, something went wrong. My bile duct was nicked during the procedure. Internal bleeding followed. What should have taken 90 minutes became an emergency. My heart went into a systole for approximately 3 minutes and 20 seconds before the surgical team got me back. 3 weeks and 3 days after Thomas told me they were there for me too. I want to spend time on what Thomas was seeing, because after my own experience, I went looking for what the research actually says about it, the research I had access to for 22 years and never bothered to read. And what I found is that Thomas was not unusual. He was, by every measure in the evidence base, exactly what the research would predict. Dr. Peter Fenwick is a neuropsychiatrist. He trained at Cambridge, spent decades as a senior lecturer at King's College London and the Institute of Psychiatry, and served as the former president of the Palliative Care Research Society. He is not a fringe researcher. His clinical specialty, the work that took up the last decades of his career, was dying, the ordinary extended process of dying in hospice and palliative care settings. His book, The Art of Dying, co-written with his wife Elizabeth Fenwick and published in 2008, is based on interviews with nursing staff across multiple UK hospices, as well as direct testimony from patients and family members. He wasn't looking for dramatic cardiac arrest stories. He was documenting what actually happens in the weeks and days before natural death, in quiet rooms, in ordinary hospitals. What he found: between 50 and 60% of hospice patients report some form of visitation experience in the days before they die. Not hallucinations in the clinical sense, not terrifying, not disorganized, not accompanied by the distress markers we use to identify delirium. Visits, deceased relatives, sometimes decades dead, present in the room. Calm, welcoming. 62% of caregivers, nurses, family members, anyone regularly present at the bedside, reported witnessing these experiences in the patients they were with. Sitting exactly where I was sitting with Thomas, watching someone have a conversation with no one visible in the corner of the room. And here's the detail that stays with me. In some documented cases, not anecdotes, but cases Fenwick and researchers at the University of Virginia have carefully documented, the dying patient describes seeing someone whose death they had not been told about. Researchers call these Picandarian experiences, seeing what you shouldn't be able to see. One case from Fenwick's research: a hospice patient who kept insisting her sister was present in the room with her, coming to take her. The family had specifically decided not to tell her that her sister had died 2 days earlier from the same cancer. They were trying to protect her. When the hospice nurse reported what the patient was saying, the daughter quietly confirmed. Her sister had died 2 days prior. The patient was, by every standard clinical measure, perceiving someone whose death she had no way of knowing about. If the brain is generating comforting imagery from stored memory, if that's the complete explanation, it should draw from what it knows, not from what it doesn't. Now, I want to tell you something I've rarely said directly. I was afraid of death for 22 years. I know how that sounds, coming from someone who spent 2 decades in an ICU. You'd think the proximity would teach you something, wear down the edges. For some nurses, it does. For me, it worked the other way. The fear that accumulated wasn't about the process of dying. I understood that clinically, I knew how to manage it. The fear was about what came after. What if I had been right all along when I told patients that their near-death experiences were the brain shutting down? What if it was nothing? What if the machine just stopped? I had spent 22 years in service to dying people while quietly terrified that I was correct. When my heart stopped in that operating room, I was not afraid. I'm not going to tell you everything that happened to me during those 3 minutes and 20 seconds. I don't do that in a single sitting. But I can tell you this: wherever I went, I was not alone. There was presence, not one, but multiple. The quality of whatever space I moved through was full, not empty. And the presences had the specific character of people who had been waiting, who had been there before I arrived. I thought of Thomas in that moment, or something like thinking. There's no good word for cognition in that state, but the recognition was there. He had been looking at something real. The corner of his room had not been empty. When I came back to consciousness in the recovery room, with a surgical nurse sitting beside me who had quietly decided she wasn't leaving until she knew I was all right, the first coherent thought I had wasn't about the technical details of what I'd experienced. It wasn't about the anesthesiologist's exact words during my arrest, which I confirmed later. The first thought was, Thomas knew. He had been watching them move through his room for days. His wife, strangers, people he didn't recognize. And on the last full day of his life, he had looked at me, not at the corner, at me specifically, and seen something near me that I couldn't see myself. He had tried to tell me. I had nodded professionally and moved on. In the weeks after my surgery, when I finally told his daughter what he had said, she hadn't been there the last day, and she needed to know how he had been at the end. She was quiet on the phone for a long time. Then she said, "He told me something about a week before he went to you. He said he wasn't afraid because they don't come at the last second. He said they come early, to make sure you're not alone going in." I've thought about that for years. I don't have a clinical framework for how a dying man can see what's coming for the nurse standing 3 feet away from him. Peter Fenwick doesn't have one either. Nobody does. What Fenwick says, carefully, with the caution of a neuropsychiatrist who understands the weight of claims, is that the data does not fit the model we've been using. The brain-generated comfort imagery model does not explain the cases where patients accurately perceive deaths they were never told about. It does not explain the consistent pattern across cultures, belief systems, and hospital settings of calm, welcoming figures of the deceased appearing in a specific location of the room, days before death. And it doesn't explain Thomas looking at me instead of the corner and telling me what he saw. He was right. They were there, for both of us.